So, had a good time at the Fall Festival yesterday. I had pretty good attendance. It wasn't quite as big as what it was a few years ago, but it was still pretty good. A lot of people come in. A lot of people, Brother Rigdon was asking, how'd you hear about the thing or whatever, and a lot of them got the mailer that we sent out and said, we got the mailer, and decided to come, based off the mailer. So hopefully that'll bear some fruit sometime. But plus the kids of the church had a good time. Grady had a good time on Friday night. He had such a good time he broke his leg, so he's down and out for a little while right now. But I told him he come in yesterday and they didn't have any crutches short enough for him at the doctor, so he come in a wheelchair. I said, you collected enough sympathy yesterday for a whole year's worth of sympathy. All the kids, they were running around playing games for Grady, and they'd bring their candy and throw it in Grady's bag. So he had a big old bag of candy by the time it was time to go home, where all the kids were winning him prizes. But he was having a good time rolling that wheelchair up to the top of the hill and then coming down the hill. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of the videos on like the vehicles that do the death wobble. If you've ever looked at like a Ford that gets the death where the front end starts shaking real bad. He come flying down that hill one time, and them front wheels on that wheelchair were flopping like that. I'm like, he's got the death wobble going on right there. And she's like, he better hope that thing don't crash. And he come flinging forward out of that thing the way he was rolling down the hill. But anyway, so like I said, thank the Lord for a good day yesterday. No incidents, so that's always a good thing. So I know one year we had a little incident where someone thought they won the prize and got all upset because they didn't win the prize. And so, but we had a good time. So if you have your Bible, turn to 2 Kings chapter number 18. 2 Kings chapter number 18. I know we went away from Hezekiah last week, but we'll be back with Hezekiah this week. And we had been studying Hezekiah and Chronicles. And I wanted to move on a little bit here, so we're going to go into 2 Kings chapter number 18, and I'm going to read in verse number 1. Obviously, this is the beginning of his reign, but we'll get down. We're really going to be looking starting in verse number 7. Now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. 25 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. And he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that David his father did. He removed the high places and brake the images and cut down the groves and brake in pieces the brazen serpent that Moses had made. For unto those days the children of Israel did burn incense to it, and he called it Nehushtan. He trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor any that were before him. For he clave to the Lord, and departed not from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him, and he prospered whithersoever he went forth. And he rebelled against the king of Assyria, and served him not. He smote the Philistines, even unto Gaza, and the borders thereof, from the lower of the watchman to the fenced city. And it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which was the 7th year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria and besieged it. And at the end of 3 years he took it, even in the 6th year of Hezekiah, that is the 9th year of Hoshea, king of Israel, Samaria was taken. And the king of Assyria did carry away Israel unto Assyria, and put them in Halah, and in Habor by the river Gozan, and in the city of the Medes, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant, and all that Moses the servant of the Lord commanded, and would not hear them nor do them. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah, and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended. Return from me, that which thou puttest on me will I bear. And the king of Assyria appointed unto Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. And Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house. At that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord and from the pillars which Hezekiah the king of Judah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. In verse number 17, and the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabsaris and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great host against Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem, and when they were come up, they came and stood in the conduit of the upper pool, which is in the highway of the fuller's field. I'm going to stop reading right there because we're not going to get that far, but I wanted to read that passage. So we've been going over Hezekiah for several weeks. Back we were mostly looking at Chronicles, but we looked at basically the first couple months of his kingdom. The first couple months, the first month was they were cleaning up the temple, they were cleaning up Jerusalem, they were cleaning up the house of God, and then that second month was when they decided to observe the Passover, and then the feast, and they celebrated that for a couple weeks, and then we stopped basically where people were going home and they were making changes at home because of things that they had done. And so this passage right here, I mean, again, sometimes when you read your Bible, it's amazing like how many years you're just jumping through, bam, bam, bam. Just, one verse you're here, and the next verse you're 10, 12 years later. And so you have to pay attention to that. And so, but what I want us to notice first is that whenever he set up his kingdom, if you think he probably would have been weakest at that point, Brother David. Whenever he first took over, if you remember, when his father was king, 200,000 men died in a day. So all those men died in a day. And so now you have him as he takes over the kingdom, and his forces would have been depleted. And so you'd have thought he would have been weakest. But he takes over, and the Bible says in verse number 7, it says the Lord was with him. And this is a very important thing. It's a very important thing that you realize. And we're going to look at this, and there's going to be a spiritual battle that's going on, but there's also going to be, what the result of that spiritual battle is something that he's dealing with in the flesh. And that's how all our Christian lives are going to be. There's going to be a spiritual battle that's going on that people don't see, the people don't know, the people, lost people don't understand. And then there's the actual battle that, you can see, that you're facing. And so Hezekiah is going to come up to what is really a spiritual battle. But he tries to deal with it in a physical manner. And so, but at the beginning of his reign, God had prospered him. God had blessed him, and God was taking care of him. Why? Because his heart was to serve God. His heart was to turn the people back to God. His heart was to do away with the idols. His heart was to do away with all the nonsense that his father had brought into the kingdom. His heart was to bring Judah back to God, but not only to bring Judah back to God, but to bring Israel back to God. And again, we talked about it, how he didn't say, hey, look, come back to me and let me be your king. It wasn't even a political thing for him. It was simply a spiritual thing for him. And so he wanted Israel and Judah back serving God and only God. And so that was his heart. And because that was his heart, God prospered him. So you see right here, it says that whithersoever he went forth, wherever he went, God prospered him. I mean, if he's like, hey, I think we ought to go down there and try and take that city back. You know what happened? They went down there and they took that city back, Brother Parks. Hey, I think we ought to go down there and take that city back. And so they go down there and take that city back. Hey, we're going to fight those people. And God was prospering him. God was taking care of him. God was blessing him, and he was blessing Judah because of that. And so they were taking stuff back that had been taken away. And so look at what it says in verse number 7. And he rebelled against the king of Assyria. Now, if you remember his father, when his father got in trouble because of the Syrians, and because of Israel. And who did he call on? He called on the king of Assyria. He said, hey, I want you to come down here. I want you to come down here and help me because, I'm fighting the king of Israel. I'm fighting the king of Syria, and I need you, the king of Assyria, to come down here and help me. And I've got it written down somewhere. Let me go back. I think it's chapter 16. So in verse number 7, and so Ahaz sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, saying, I am thy servant, and thy son, come up and save me out of the hand of the king of Syria, and out of the hand of king of Israel, which rise up against me. And Ahaz took the silver and gold that was found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasures of the king's house, and sent it for a present to the king of Assyria. And the king of Assyria hearkened unto him, for the king of Assyria went up against Damascus, and took it, and carried the people out of it captive to Kir, and slew Rezin. And so you have here where his father goes to the king of Assyria, or sends a message to the king of Assyria, and says, hey, look, he said, I'm your servant and your son. I'm your servant and your son. Whatever you tell me, whatever it's going to cost me, I don't care what you say, but I need you to come rescue me from these people. And what does he do? And it always drives me crazy when they do this. They go straight to the house of the Lord, and they empty out the treasury, and then they start taking the gold off the walls and taking the gold off the doors. The gold, they go straight down there, and they rip all that stuff off, and they send it down there, and they say, there, now save me. And so again, we know from Chronicles how that there was another time that Ahaz thought the king of Assyria was going to help him, and he chose not to. But apparently the Assyrians had decided, well, you know what, this is a pretty good thing right here, so we're just going to continue this, and we're just going to keep telling them, you better pay tribute to me for my protection, because if you don't pay, then we're not going to protect you. If you don't pay, the next time someone comes up against you and they're fighting against you, we're going to fight with them and not for you. And so Hezekiah says, well, why are we doing this right here? First of all, the Assyrians don't have a God like our God. The Assyrians don't have a God like our God. And why should we, as the people of God, have to depend on the Assyrians to come protect us? It's just backwards thinking. People should be coming to us and say, will you please pray that God will help us and save us from our enemies? But instead, the people of God, who had gotten themselves in all kinds of idolatry and didn't know who they should serve and who they should worship, were going to the enemies of God and saying, hey, protect us. And so Hezekiah says, you know what, this is backwards. This is backwards, and I'm not going to pay it. So he tells him in verse number 7, and he rebelled against the king of Assyria and served him not. He's like, look, I'm not serving you. You can send your bill down here if you want to, but guess what? It's not getting paid. And you can send your army down here if you want to, and we'll tell them to go back home too, or we'll send them home. Why? Because God's for us, and God's blessing us, and I'm not scared of you or your army. Sounds pretty good. So in verse number 8, he smote the Philistines even unto Gaza, and the borders thereof from the tower of the watchman to the fenced city. So now, again, another classic enemy of Israel or Judah was the Philistines. You think all the way back into Saul's day and David's day, who were they fighting? They were fighting the Philistines. They were fighting the Philistines, and so it was a constant thorn in Israel and Judah's side is the Philistines. And so you know how it is. If you ever watch, if you got someone who's top dog, and then they start showing weakness, guess what? There are a lot of wolves that are ready to come take what they can. And just show just a little bit of weakness, and they'll come take what they can. And so that was the Philistines. They were not top dog anymore. They were letting the Syrians do the fighting. They were letting the Assyrians do the fighting. But whenever they got a chance, they would try and recover a little, or take a little territory. And so now Hezekiah is like, you know what? We're taking that stuff back. We're taking that stuff back. My father lost it, or the previous, I'm going to call it administration, the previous kings lost it, but we're taking it back. And so they go and they take on the Philistines, and guess what? God blesses them. God blesses them, and they take on the Philistines, and they take back what they wanted to take back. And everything is going pretty good. Now, if you look in verse number 9, we're going to switch gears just a touch here, but in verse number 9, now we're going to be looking at Israel, but there's a point here. And it came to pass in the 4th year of King Hezekiah, which is the 7th year of Hoshea, the son of Elah, king of Israel, that Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, came up against Samaria and besieged it. So now we have, and again, if you read in the previous chapter, you understand that God is about to put Israel into captivity. If you remember, whenever Israel was fighting Judah and they took all them slaves, they got in a big fight because they said, hey, look, or captive, we'll call them captives. They took all those captives and they're like, hey, look, we need to send these people back. We're in enough trouble with God as it is, and we sure don't want this on our charge. And so now you have where God is about to let Israel go into captivity. And so he's going to use the Assyrians to do it. And so the Assyrians come up and they fight against Israel, and they fight against them for 3 years. So it wasn't just a little battle. It wasn't just, hey, we're going to come up here and we're going to try and fight for a little bit, and we're going to see if we can take this city. We're going to see if we can take this land from them and keep them. No, this was a serious fight. This was a serious fight, and Israel was going to lose. And again, like I said earlier, they were going to lose the physical battle because they had already lost the spiritual battle. They were going to lose the physical battle with the enemy because they had many years before given up on the spiritual battle. And it says it, we'll get down to it in just a second, but it basically says that they transgressed his covenant and all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and would not hear them nor do them. And so if you remember, as we studied the previous kings, when we were studying those kings of Israel, I mean, even when God would send God had Elijah for Israel, God had Elisha for Israel, and he had other prophets that really, it seemed like, were just for Israel, and God would let them talk to those kings and let them try to move those kings, and those kings would sometimes make a little bit of a move, but they would never make a full move to God. And some of them were just terribly wicked kings. And the people followed in that wickedness. The people followed in their idolatry. And no matter what God did, he could not get that out of their heart. And so it came to a place where God said, I'm going to have to do more and more and more to them until I'm finally going to be able to get this out of their heart. And so now we're here at this place with Israel. We're here at this place in Israel, and so it says at the end of 3 years, they took it. So after 3 years of fighting, finally, Israel's like, all right, we're done. We've got no one left. We've got no one left. We've got no one left to fight. There's not enough, and y'all have finally succeeded, and we're defeated. Here's the white flag. Take us and do with us what you will, because we got nothing left to fight with. And it's a shame, again, because like I said, that was a spiritual battle that they were defeated before they ever started to fight. They were defeated before they ever started to fight. And so in verse number 11 it says, the king of Assyria carried away Israel unto Assyria and put them in Halah and in Habor by the river of Gozan and in the city of the Medes. Verse 12, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord their God. Because they obeyed not. That's why they ended up where you talk to people and you're like, you ever talk to someone and the answer's right there staring them in the face? I don't understand why God's doing this to me. Well, I can tell you why God's doing it to you. I can tell you why this is happening. Because you're not obeying the voice of the Lord. That's why. Because you don't want to hear that. But they don't want to hear you. They don't want to hear you say that. They just want, and I understand a lot of people are this way. Some people, and when you get married, you have to figure this out, Brother Parks. When you get married, you have to figure this out. And once you have kids, you have to figure this out. Some people are like, hey, I need to tell you this. So they tell you this. And it almost appears that it's like, hey, I need your help. I'm asking you a question. But they're not asking a question. They just need to tell you it. They don't want your advice. They just want to say it out loud. But other people are different, and they're like, hey, let me tell you about what I got going on in my life. Oh, I tell you what, if that were me, this is what I'd do. And some people like that. But some people don't want your suggestion. They just want to tell you what's going on, but they don't want you to tell them anything. I just need you to hear. I don't need you to be a problem solver. I'll figure this out myself. And so anyway, so here you have where they rebelled against God, and God said, because they would not hear and they would not obey, I had to do this. I didn't, obviously God didn't want to do this. God intended for them to move into that land and take over that land and live there perpetually. That's where he wanted them to be. But he wanted them to keep the commandments. He wanted them to keep the covenant. He wanted them to only serve him and not serve the gods of the land. He warned them over and over, from Moses to Joshua to through the judges and into the prophets. He warned them over and over not to mix with the people. Don't you mix with those people in the land. Don't you mix with those people in the land. Because if you mix with those people in the land, you're going to take up their religion. If you give your daughters to their sons, you're going to take up their religion. If your sons take their daughters, you're going to take their religion. And when you take their religion, that means you're rejecting me, and you're going to start doing things that I'm not happy with. Over and over and over, God warned them and warned them. And Chris, they got into the land, and what did they do? Hey, she's pretty. She's kind of cute. Well, what religion is she? I don't care what religion she is. She's cute. Hey, he's kind of handsome. Look how strong he is. What religion is he? I don't care what religion he is. He's kind of cute. He's handsome. He's strong. He's got a lot of land. He's got, he's very famous in his whatever. He can do this and he can do that. So what? And so, because of that, they obeyed not the voice of the Lord. They obeyed, and again, when he says they obeyed not the voice of the Lord, they weren't hearing God's voice from God to their ears. They were hearing the prophets that God sent among them and saying, hey, turn back to God. That's who they were hearing. But God said they obeyed not his voice. And they obeyed not, but transgressed his covenant. Again, over and over and over again. Again, when you looked at Israel, from the time that Jeroboam took over, from the moment he took over, he's like, hey, we're going to build these calves. We're going to build these calves. Don't go down there to Jerusalem. Don't go down there to the temple. Don't waste your time down there. We're going to build these calves. These are your gods, Israel. Come down here and worship down here. And every king after him, even though they understood that God rejected Jeroboam because of those calves, you know what they did? They kept them calves. And then they would bring in other forms. They brought in Baal. And so then the next king would come in, and he'd work on taking out Baal, but he wouldn't take him calves out. And they departed not from the sins of Jeroboam. They departed not from the sin. Over and over and over. King after king after king. Departed not. Jehu wipes out Baal. But he didn't depart from the sins of Jeroboam. I mean, you'd have thought just one of them would have said, hey, you know what? I mean, it's a pretty good little gig I got right here. You know what? How could I get this where I'm really set up nice? Well, here's an idea. Just do what God wants you to do. And what does God want me to do? He wants me to get rid of them calves. That's what he wants me to do. Well, I can't get rid of them calves. If I get rid of them calves, they're going to go down to Judah. If they go down to Judah, then they're going to be like, hey, Judah's got a king. Why do we need two kings? Why don't we just all combine ourselves back together and be one kingdom again? And so they would never look at it spiritually like, hey, God would bless me if I take this out. They just look at it like, hey, if I do this, I'm going to lose. I'm going to lose what I got, so I can't. And so God punished them. So again, this started in the fourth year of Hezekiah. 3 years, so we get to the 7th year. So now we're to verse number 13. Now in the 14th year of King Hezekiah did Sennacherib, so another king of Assyria, but different king. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, come up against all the fenced cities of Judah and took them. What in the world happened? I mean, we had just read in verse number 7 how God had prospered them, and God was prospering Hezekiah, and he was blessing them, and so what happened? I think two things happened. One, I'm going to go back to Isaiah chapter number 10, verse number 5. Verse number 5 says, O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge to take the spoil, and to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Howbeit he meaneth not so, neither doth his heart think so, but it is in his heart to destroy and cut off nations, not a few. For he saith, Are not my princes altogether kings? Is not Calnoas and Carchemish? Is not Hamath and Arphad? Is not Samaria as Damascus? As my hand hath found the kingdoms of the idols, and whose graven images did excel them of Jerusalem and of Samaria, shall I not, as I have done unto Samaria and her idols, so do to Jerusalem and her idols? Wherefore it shall come to pass that when the Lord hath performed his whole work upon Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, I will punish the fruit of the stout heart of the king of Assyria and the glory of his high looks. So what is that saying right there? So it's saying that God called Judah a hypocritical nation. God looked at them and said they look spiritual, but they're hypocrites. They look spiritual. Again, if you remember when Hezekiah took over in the beginning of his reign, I mean, everyone was all in. They were all in. They were destroying idols, and they were giving offerings, and they were restoring the temple, and they celebrated that Passover and the feast, and then they said, hey, this was so good, let's do one more week. And then they went all throughout where they lived, and they destroyed those idols in those high places throughout all the countryside. In Jerusalem and then in all the countryside, they went out and did it. But Chris, that was year 1 of his reign. In year 14 of his reign, God said, I'm going to have to do something. Again, not Hezekiah's fault. It doesn't appear that Hezekiah wavered. From what we read right there, it says he trusted in the Lord of the God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor any that were before him, for he clave to the Lord and parted not from following him, but kept his commandments, which the Lord commanded Moses. So it wasn't Hezekiah. That was not who was the hypocrite. He was not the hypocrite. But it was the people that had turned their hearts. And outwardly, they didn't have those idols anymore, but I think inwardly, they still served them. Outwardly, they didn't have those high places and burn incense like they used to, but I think in their hearts, they were still burning incense, and they were still going to them high places. I don't understand, Miss Jimmy. I don't know what that did to them, what that did for them, why after seeing what God did and being moved by God, how they were moved by God. But some reason God called them a hypocritical nation, Chris. And God said, I am going to use the Assyrians, And in the image there when I was reading that the Assyrians were going to decide that they were the ones doing it, not God doing the work through the Assyrians, that the Assyrian was going to decide it was him and he was the one wiping out, which, I mean, when we get a little bit further on, that's exactly what happens. That's exactly what's said. And the tables get turned on the Assyrians because of their attitude. But you understand that here God said, hey, I have to deal with a hypocritical nation. I have to deal with them. Why? Because that's exactly what they are. They look good. They look right. If you ask them a question, they'll say the right words, but that's not who they are in their heart. That's not who they are. And if you're not watching, that's not who they are. If they think no one's watching, if they think they can get away with it, they're going to try and get away with it. And so God saw that. He saw that in that nation. And he's like, this is unacceptable. And so in verse number 14, and Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria to Lachish, saying, I have offended. Return for me that which thou puttest on me will I bear. Again, he's talking to the wrong person. It was not the king of Assyria he had a problem with. It was God he had a problem with. And again, I think Hezekiah was right. But his people were not right. And God was doing a spiritual work. And Hezekiah saw it simply as a physical work. And so instead of dealing with it spiritually, he tried to deal with it physically. And it turned out terrible. And so, I thought about, if you turn to Joshua chapter number 7, verse number 6, and Joshua rent his clothes and fell to the earth upon his face before the ark of the Lord until the eventide, he and the elders of Israel, and put dust upon their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord God, wherefore hast thou at all brought this people over Jordan to deliver us into the hand of the Amorites to destroy us? Would to God we had been content and dwelt on the other side of Jordan. O Lord, what shall I say when Israel turneth their backs before their enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land shall hear of it, and shall environ us round, and cut off our name from the earth. And what wilt thou do unto thy great name? And the Lord said unto Joshua, Get thee up. Wherefore liest thou upon thy face? Thus upon thy face Israel hath sinned. So here's another example where a leader looked at a physical battle and did not understand that it was a spiritual battle. He looked at it as a physical battle. Hey, I can't believe we lost this many people. We got whipped. We shouldn't have got whipped. I can't believe we got whipped. God, we trusted in you. And he didn't realize it was a spiritual battle. And he said, Get thee up, wherefore layest thou upon thy face? Israel has sinned, and they have also transgressed my covenant, which I commanded them. For they have even taken of the accursed thing, and have also stolen and dissembled also, and they have put it even among their own stuff. Therefore the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their backs before their enemies, because they were accursed. Neither will I be with you anymore, except you destroy the accursed thing from among you. I'm going to stop reading right there. But again, what happened? God said, Hey, Joshua, you have a spiritual problem in the camp. You don't have a physical problem. I will fight for you. I mean, you think how many times you think about Jericho. They just march around the walls, march around the walls, march around the walls. The walls fall in. Didn't have to lift a hand. Just had to march. Why? Because they were spiritually right. But when they were spiritually wrong, guess what? God said, I'm not going to fight for you. I'm not going to fight for you. I'm not going to fight for you. I'm going to let the enemy do something to you that I really don't want done to you. But I'm going to have to let them do that thing to you so that I can get you back to the point where I want you spiritually. That's what God did. God allowed all those men to die because one man sinned. It's pretty serious, Brother Parks. And so you get here to Hezekiah's reign, and when this occurred, brother, he said, I think this is a physical problem. I think this is a physical problem. And didn't even look at it spiritually, Chris. Again, because in my mind, I'm like, hey, what happened to Hezekiah of verse number 7? And the Lord was with him, and he prospered whithersoever he went forth, and he rebelled against the king of Assyria and served him not. The guy that rebelled is now like, hey, I've offended. I really went a little bit too far. And, I really shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have said it. I was really feeling my oats that day. I ate a double portion of Wheaties that morning, and I was feeling pretty strong. And so I was feeling really pretty good. And so, look, can we just forget what I said back then? And let's just talk. Look, I'm probably going to owe you some interest. I'm probably going to owe you a little bit of back pay. I understand I'm going to owe you a little bit of back pay. But come on, let's talk about this. I don't need you coming into my kingdom and taking my stuff. I mean, we're friends, aren't we? I don't understand, Brother Parks. Brother Tyrone, I don't understand. I don't understand why Hezekiah did that. I don't understand why the first thing he didn't do is what he ended up having to do, is go down to the house of God, get down on his knees and say, God, I don't know what just happened here. I mean, everywhere I went, you prospered me. I rebelled against Assyria. Everything was fine. I fought the Philistines. Everything was great. And the Assyrians came and they took Israel. And that was 7 years ago, and everything was going pretty good. God, why in the world did you just let the Assyrians come up and just spoil the outskirts of my kingdom? That's not what he did. That's not what he did at all. The first thing he does is like, hey, send him a letter. And there's the true application here. There's the true application. But also, I mean, when it's your time to fight, it's time to fight. When it's your time to fight, it's time to fight. And so he tries appeasement. He tries appeasement. And you know what appeasement got him? Not a thing. Didn't get him a thing. Appeasement got him nothing. And so that's the shame of it here, is he humbled himself before the king, and the king's like, he just showed weakness. I mean, every one of us can think of an example right now, over in Afghanistan. The only thing those people understand is power. The only thing those people understand is, hey, if we raise our head while they're over here, they're going to shoot our head off. If we act up, we're going to be in trouble. And so you can have 2,500 men just sitting over there hanging out, and no one killed in a year and a half, and they ain't doing a thing. But as soon as you show a moment of weakness, guess what? They overtake the whole country in days. Why? Because you showed weakness. You showed weakness. And so here we have Hezekiah, and his weakness just made the king of Assyria bolder. He's not even going to fight. Took us 3 years to take over Israel. Hezekiah is not even going to fight at all. And so again, I don't understand. I don't understand why Hezekiah didn't look at this as a spiritual battle. What if Hezekiah had just went immediately, Brother Parks, immediately down and prayed and said, God, what in the world? It's okay to ask God why. Do you think God's really going to be upset with you? Like, God, I don't understand why this just happened. I don't understand why. God just, He's not going to keep you in the dark. Be like, well, this is a spiritual thing, but I'm not going to tell you it's a spiritual thing. I'm just going to make you suffer. No. God's going to let you know, hey, this is why this happened to you. This is why this is happening to you. This is why this is going on. Instead of, I wish Hezekiah had never sent that to Sennacherib and said, hey, what can I do for you? You know, I mean, his dad, I think I already read it, but his dad's like, hey, you know, I'm your servant and your son. I'm your servant and your son. What do you want me to do? Just name it. Name it, and then I'll do it if you'll come protect me. He's not even asking the Assyrians to protect him. He's like, look, whatever I need to do, just leave me alone. And so there was no faith in God shown right here in verse number 14. It comes out later, but not here in verse number 14. It's all weakness. It's all just like, I tell you what, he's stronger than us. Army's weak. We're going to be weak. We're going to be beat. We're going to be beaten. We're going to be defeated. Let me just see if I can pay him off real quick. What happened? He got out of thinking spiritual and got to looking at it physically. He got out of thinking spiritual, Chris. He got out of looking at it in a spiritual manner, and he simply looked at it physically and said, well, you know, how do kings win fights? Biggest, baddest army, or I got to pay them off, tell them leave me alone. That's the way kings win fights. But that was not at all what God wanted to happen. Again, like I said, God said, I'm going to use the hand of the Assyrians to punish a hypocritical nation. And God, I feel like God could have went to Hezekiah. You know, Hezekiah could have came to God. Said, God, what's going on? Why did this happen? You know, you've always prospered me. I've always been blessed. You know, everywhere I went, you prospered me and blessed me. But how did this happen? And God could have told Hezekiah, it looks good on the outside, but it's a veneer. It's just a veneer. They're hypocrites on the inside. We had a piece of furniture that's been in the house for many years now. It's probably been in the house 13, 14 years, and my wife sees these decorating ideas, and so she's like, hey, I want to cut this up. So Brother Parks, it looked like it was wood. I thought it was wood. And so she's like, well, you cut the ends off of this, and I want it to be this shape right here. And so when we cut it, it was like it's not styrofoam, but it was like almost like it was spray foam. But it looked like wood you'd have thought it was wood. It was just cheap spray foam. As soon as we cut it, I'm like, what in the world? I can't believe. I mean, and it's name brand. I mean, it's like Thomasville. It's name brand furniture. You know, it's not, you know, Chinese garbage junk. I mean, this was Thomasville, you know, with North Carolina sprayed on it and everything. But no, it was just spray foam. It was just foam that they molded into a thing, and then they put it and made it look like wood. Textured it to make it look like wood. And it was just junk on the inside. And that's what Judah had become. Somewhere from the first year of his reign to the 14th year of his reign, God said, I'm not going to be able to deal with this much longer. I'm not going to be able to deal with this much longer. I'm going to have to do something about this. Somewhere in that first year when they were doing so good, to the 14th year, God's like, really hate it, but we're going to have to deal with this. And Hezekiah missed it. He missed that God said, hey, you're not acting, you're acting, but who you are is not who you're acting like you are. And so because of that, I'm going to have to deal with that. I'm going to have to pull the covers back and say, this is who you are. And I'm going to use the king of Assyria to do it. And so in verse number 15, it says, and Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord. Miss Jimmy, I don't understand why that's the first place they go to. You got a whole kingdom full of wealth, and the first place you go to, Brother Parks, is right down to the house of God and say, what you got in your treasury? What y'all got in the bank account? I need every bit of it. I mean, if you remember, Hezekiah gave all those sheep and all those animals, and then the princes gave just as many, and actually I think 2,500 more. Could he not went to the princes and say, "All right, boys, if y'all want to keep your land, if y'all want to have private property rights, if y'all don't want to be slaves down there, down there with the rest of Israel, open your pockets." But that's not what they do. The first thing they do is they run down the house of the Lord and in the treasures of the king's house. At that time did Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty serious. I mean, we're not just talking about, go down there and see what they got in the offering plate. We're talking about looking at something, Brother Parks, and say, you remember whenever we took that and we overlaid that with gold? Yeah. We're going to have to peel that gold off. We're going to have to peel that overlayment off and take it down there so that we can pay him what he puts on us. It just boggles my mind. It says that at that time did the king Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord, from the pillars which Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. It wasn't even the king of Assyria's right to have that. That was dedicated to God. That was dedicated to God. And yet he said, we're just going to have to do it. I told him, put on me whatever you're going to put on me, and I'll do it. And that's what he did. And he took something that was dedicated to God, took it away from God, and said, here, let me give it to you, and you protect me. Or you not hurt me. Sorry, it's not really protecting, but just don't hurt me. And didn't go to God and say, God, what is going on here? Why is this happening? Do you know what I'm going to have to do here, God? He put on me more than we can drum up. And the only place I can look at is in your temple, and I see that gold. And so can you do something? Can you do something before I have to go to your temple and pull that gold down? But he didn't do it. And again, here's the problem, and I read it. It didn't stop him. Brother Parks, he said, you send me 100 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold, and we'll be good. So Hezekiah sends him the silver and the gold. He sends it out of his own house, out of the king's treasury and out of the house of the Lord, to the point of ripping stuff off the walls. And it never even slowed him down, Brother Croft. It just made Hezekiah look that much weaker. It just made him look that much weaker. It made him look ridiculous. It made him look like, Hezekiah done empty. Now he's got nothing to offer. And not only does he have nothing to offer, now he can't go to another kingdom and say, hey, Egypt, come up here and protect me against Assyria. Why? Because he'd already took everything and gave it to Assyria to leave him alone. Why? Because he tried to fight a spiritual battle physically. He tried to fight a spiritual battle through the power of the flesh. He tried to say, I know how to deal with this. We've all done it myself. I'll deal with this. And not even realizing that God had intended another way. God was doing a work. And if you'd have just looked at it spiritually and said, that's what God's doing. Eventually he gets to that point. But like I said, at this point right here, stop right here at verse number 17, Hezekiah is looking pretty bad in his leadership. Because he just tried to bribe the king of Assyria to leave him alone. And the king of Assyria says, nah, thanks for the money. That way I can go buy some more food, pay the army a little bit more, give them all a bonus for doing a good job. But all you've done is embolden the enemy. Because they tried to fight a spiritual battle physically. Thank you.